Hi, this is Angie. Thank you so much for joining me today for a card making tutorial. The card I'm going to show you to make is a light up anniversary card like you see on screen. To start, I'm using a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of 110 pound cardstock. This is nothing of craft origination, it's just a cheap copy paper that I've picked up at the local office works, and it seems to do the trick for my crafting needs. I'm going to speed up through the ink blending as I'm just going back and forth between the colours to make sure I get a smooth gradient for a real sunset type look. The colours I'll be using are Fossilized Amber, Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet and Blueprint Sketch. Now I'm going to take my dies and run them through my die cutting machine using black cardstock to ensure I get that silhouette type look over the background that we've just blended. I've got the man and woman holding hands with a little love heart, which is where we're going to have the light shining through, and then I'm using a grassy border die that I have for the ground. Then I'm just deciding placement for the actual silhouette to make sure that I'm happy with where everything is sitting, and then I can decide where the light will be shining through. Now that I'm happy with the placement, I'm grabbing a pencil and quickly outlining the inside of the silhouette so that I can cut that out for the light to shine through. I don't have a die that fits that exact size, so I'm just cutting that out with the art knife very quickly, following that pencil line that I've drawn in. I'm checking the placement of the silhouette over my hand cutout. Then I'm using a black Copic marker to colour the core of the cardstock so you can't see any of that white peeping through. Next, I'm holding the cardstock over my base panel, marking out where the SMD LED will be placed so that once everything is done, I know the light is shining directly through where that little silhouette's hands are going to be placed. I'm marking out the spot for the battery just roughly by hand, drawing up my circuit, the first line being the positive, noticing I've probably drawn the line too far away, as you need to ensure that the copper strips are touching both ends of the LED, and you can see it's very small, so I'm just moving the line a little bit closer. The first line is the positive, and then I'm drawing in the second line, which is the negative, so that we've got a completed circuit. Next, I've got my piece of cardstock, which I'm going to use to make a switch. This should be big enough to encase your entire battery. Then I'm just scoring it in half with about a millimeter gap so that it's about as thick as the battery. Now I'm adhering the switch to where the battery will go using double-sided tape, using a pencil to complete the circuit, marking the positive and negative again. And now for the fun part, making the circuit with my copper tape. So I've estimated how much tape I'm going to need, and I am trying to get it off the backing, having a bit of difficulty there, and finally get it going. So I run it very close to where I've marked, do a sharp turn. There's lots of tutorials online if you need help with how to do that. It just takes a bit of practice. And then I'm running that over the switch and then underneath, so that once you press it, that copper will have a good connection to the battery. So that's the positive line. I'm using my bone folder to press it down so that it gets a really good connection and a good flow for the 3-volt electricity. And now I'm going to use the last little bit there to run and do the negative side of the circuit, which will run at the bottom, touching the LED little connection points, doing those sharp turns again, and then running the circuit there. So you'll see the battery will be adhered to the negative part, and then the plus part will just push down, and that will effectively be your switch. Now I'm popping the SMD where it will go, getting the battery in the correct placement and testing the circuit to make sure everything's working. Now I'm getting my double-sided tape to encase that battery. It's very important, I will mention now, that you make sure that this is very well secured. They are very hazardous if swallowed, so I like to make really sure that I've got full coverage all the way around the battery, as I do have young children. And when I store them in my home, I do have them under lock and key in a cash safe that I've picked up at a cheap shop, but it's got a lock on it, so I know my kids can't get into it. So I'm doubling up the foam tape so that there is enough room when the card's connected, that there's not pressure for that battery to be running all the time, and you have to actually push down to complete that circuit to get that light glowing. Now I'm running with double-sided foam adhesive all the way around the card, to adhere my card front to that. And I will mention the SMD has been attached there. After I tested it, I attached that with a piece of just clear sellotape to make sure that there was a really good pressure and that that circuit is fully connected and glowing. I test at every stage of the process of making the card. Now I'm grabbing a piece of vellum and a piece of copy paper, which I don't end up using. So I just halve the vellum so it's a little bit thicker, and test how that looks over the light, and it disperses it really nicely. So now I'm just grabbing a piece of sellotape or clear tape and securing that vellum in place. And that's to the back of, obviously, the coloured cardstock. Now I'm adhering the silhouette to the card, making sure to get it exactly where I want it, because the Distress Oxide ink will change colour where you've had anything wet touching it, so I try and get it bang on first time. Then I'm adhering the grass to complete the silhouette look, trimming it up as necessary and gluing that down. The glue I'm using is Ranger Multi-Medium Matte. I find that's a really strong adhesive and it dries nicely for me, and I'm just using a dispenser, like a precision tip that I've picked up off AliExpress, to make it really easy to get that glue in without too much wastage or spillage. The good thing about the mat is that it doesn't show up shiny if you do not quite align it perfectly. Then I'm just grabbing my sanding tool and smoothing off all the edges. My paper trimmer needs a new blade, so I'm just making do with what I have at present, smoothing off those edges to get a really nice square look. And now I'm popping my sentiment on, which is just going to say happy anniversary. I'm using my stamping tool, lining the stamps up, happy and anniversary, lining them up as best I can by eye. Then I'm checking it on the grid to make sure that it's fully aligned and not crooked. I'm using my Hero Arts Intense black ink, inking the stamp up, gently rubbing over. I don't want to apply too much pressure and really distort those fine letters, giving them another little tap. Joy of a stamping tool, you can double stamp and get a really crisp look. Now the fun part, popping the battery in and mounting the card front on to that foam. I'm just removing a little bit from each corner and popping it out so I can try and get that front quite square on there. I do struggle with that a bit. It's a tip I've picked up watching Natasha Foot's tutorials. So I just gently adhere in the corners where that adhesive is exposed, and now I'm removing the double-sided tape backing and testing. As I say, I test at every stage of the process. Now I'm using my ATG to adhere the card front to the actual opening part of the card. Eyeing that, lining it up, and done. And then I test the card again, and I choose a little stamp to mark out the little push section, as you can see here, and voila, your card is done. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.